Welcome to this If Oxford event. My name is Dane Comerford, Festival Director, and it's really good to have this discussion this evening around adolescence and self-harming. It's a really important topic. You'll know the festival has over 100 events ranging from health and well-being to astrophysics and cosmology, or music and the mind, and stories around adventure. It's a pleasure to welcome caller Riley McGowan, who's from the National Institute of Health Research.
Thank you, Dane. Good evening and welcome to our talk, Adolescent Self-Harm. What can we do about it? My name is Cora Riley McGowan. I'm the Patient Carer and Public Involvement and Engagement Manager for the National Institute for Health Research, or the NIHR, here in Thames Valley. The NIHR is the government's research funding arm. The NIHR fund about £1 billion a year in health research, and this is in all types of research, from laboratory-based medicine and science to studies taking place in NHS hospitals, such as Paul's research. Our goal is to improve the NHS, public health and social care through research. Research has been at the forefront of the response to the pandemic in prevention, vaccines, diagnosis and treatment. You can learn more and search for studies to take part in at bepartofresearch.uk. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Paul Stallard, who's the Head of Psychological Therapies for Oxford Health. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Cora, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this evening. So thank you very much for logging on tonight, and I hope that you find this webinar interesting, and I hope that it sort of gives you an insight into how we can help adolescents who are self-harming. So firstly, let me just introduce myself. So as Cora has mentioned, I am a sort of clinical psychologist who has worked in child and adolescent mental health services for many years. So I have spent a lot of my clinical time working with young people who are self-harming. And I also have an academic role by being linked in with the University of Bath in the Department of Health. And so that allows me to also use my sort of research and academic experience to try to find some solutions to the sort of health challenges which are all around us. So what I'm going to be trying to do in this presentation is to give you some of my sort of clinical experience, but also to share with you some of the research which we are undertaking to explore what we can do to help adolescents who are self-harming. So the first question really, and where we're going to start, is just to understand a little bit about self-harm. What is self-harm? And this appears to be quite a simple question, but it's quite contentious. So the definition which we're going to be using tonight is a deliberate act of hurting oneself regardless of intent. Now, the contentious bit about this is the last two words there, last three words, regardless of intent, because there is some debate within the academic literature about whether in fact self-harm with suicidal intent is different from self-harm with non-suicidal intent. But for the presentation tonight, that's the sort of definition which we will be using. So what sort of acts of hurting oneself might constitute self-harm? And there's a variety of acts which would come under this. One of the most common ones, which we see quite frequently in young people and adolescents, is self-cutting. And again, that varies very much from sort of superficial scratching through to very deep cutting and persistent cutting in the same place, so that young people end up with some very deep infected wounds. Swallowing pills, overdosing, burning oneself, hitting oneself or headbanging. Again, this is something which people may not necessarily sort of immediately associate with self-harm, but it is something which happens quite commonly with a lot of young people. Similarly, restrictive eating, walking out in front of vehicles, jumping from heights, and things like attempted strangulation or attempted hanging. So there's a real raft of behaviors which young people can engage in, which would fall under the banner of self-harm. So how common is self-harm? Well, again, another very sort of simple question, which is very difficult to answer. And the reason for that is that the majority of self-harm occurs in private, and therefore it goes unrecognized. Few young people who self-harm ever present to the medical services. That's our challenge, trying to unpick this. But what we do know from some community surveys is that around about 10 to 15% of adolescents will report an episode of self-harm at some stage. And in a study which we conducted in schools in Wiltshire, Bristol, Bath and North East Somerset and Nottingham, we sort of asked almost 5,000 young people aged 12 to 16 about thoughts of self-harm and acts of self-harm over a 12-month period. And we found that 27% of this age group had thoughts of self-harming over the course of a year, and that 15% had acted on those thoughts at least once over the course of a 12-month period. So you can start to see that self-harm in adolescence is quite common, and that a lot of young people will engage in self-harm at some stage. Who is at risk of self-harm? Well, there are many factors, many variables which we know are associated with self-harm. Some of the ones which I've sort of highlighted on this slide are other mental health problems like depression and anxiety. We know that people who self-harm tend to have low self-esteem. They often feel overwhelmingly hopeless about the future. They may well be experiencing problems with peers and bullying. There has been evidence from a number of studies that young people who self-harm have been abused in the past. We also know that family stress and conflict can create and encourage sort of self-harm in young people. And we also know that young people who have been exposed to self-harm in others are also more at risk of self-harming themselves. Why do adolescents self-harm? Well, I think that the first thing which we need to say very clearly is that self-harm is not about attention seeking. And what we know is that self-harm in adolescents, when you talk to them, is often undertaken as a way of coping. So self-harm for a lot of young people is a way of trying to create a physical pain which distracts them or takes their mind off of the emotional pain which they might be experiencing. It gives them an attempt to control their feelings, because a lot of young people who self-harm feel that they have no control over their emotions. And actually self-harming is one of the things they feel they can do to regain some control. We also know that some young people talk about self-harming as a way of punishing themselves, that they don't feel that they deserve any sort of positive things to happen. And a lot of young people self-harm because they want other people to recognize their distress, so that they're trying to show people how they are feeling. Now, in the study which I'm going to be talking about later in this talk, Beating Adolescent Self-Harm Bash, we ask adolescents about the reasons for self-harming, And from the first 100 adolescents who we've got engaged in our study, 77 of these said that they wanted to get relief from a terrible state of mind. So the emotional distress, the sort of thoughts which were going through their head were overwhelming. 53 of these 100 wanted to punish themselves, but only 2 reported that they wanted to frighten somebody. So it's not about attention seeking, it's about emotional management and ways of dealing with distress. So here's just a few quotes from young people which sort of put those statements in context. Feeling frustrated with myself, trying to get some degree of control over something, feeling numb. A lot of young people say that they feel young and they just want to feel something. So the physical pain is a way of reconnecting with what is going on. Now, the issue which I think creates a lot of anxiety in many people is about, well, is self-harm, when you see young people self-harming, is the young person going to be at risk of suicide? Well, we do know that self-harm is a risk factor for subsequent suicide, but we also know that the overwhelming majority of those people who self-harm do not intend to take their own life. We also know that, fortunately, in the UK, suicide in children is very, very rare. So that getting statistics about this is again quite difficult. But the information which we could get from the Office for National Statistics showed that in sort of the years 2016 to 2017, there were only 5 deaths from suicide in young people under the age of 13, and there were 141 in young people up to the age of 18. As a number of you might well know, the rates of suicide increased quite steadily in the 18 to 25 year age group after that. But in younger children, rates tend to be low. So what can we do? So I want to sort of now spend a little bit of time thinking about what can you do if you are a parent and you're a carer, and if you find that your child is self-harming. So there's a number of sort of factors which, through clinical work and through the sort of research which we've undertaken, we know can be helpful. And this is also from talking with young people who self-harm about what they feel would be a helpful response from adults. Firstly, I think that anybody who discovers that their child is self-harming will have a range of emotional reactions. A number of people might feel very scared. They might be very frightened about what is happening and scared about what their young person might do. They might feel very guilty or responsible for what has happened, which may, they think in their own mind, be creating the young person self-harm. They might be angry, and feeling angry that somebody is doing this is again another common reaction which we notice from parents. And similarly, it might be one of shame. I'm just feeling really ashamed that my child is sort of feeling like this and is self-harming. So there are a range of emotional reactions that you as an adult might experience. And I think that the first thing to understand is that these are normal. What you are discovering is something which is going to come as a shock. And I think that the first thing to do is just to acknowledge how you're feeling. Accept that that is your response, but don't start to blame the young person for how you feel. Just acknowledge your own feelings so that you can then move on to the next steps of trying to help your young person to deal with their self-harm. So the second message I want to try and sort of share with you is that it's really important to remember that your child is actually trying to show you that they need your help. It's a way of communicating that they are not coping. It's not about trying to upset you or trying to get you angry. your child is struggling to come to terms with their feelings and needs your help. So I think that when you start to understand self-harm as a sign that the child is in trouble, it helps you to then become much more compassionate in the way you deal with it. The third thing is to then start to talk with the young person about their self-harm and how they're feeling. Now, it's not uncommon for people to feel quite anxious about doing this. Many people tell me that they don't know what to say. They worry that they're going to make things worse if they talk to their young person about self-harm. But what we know from young people is that talking about self-harm can be really helpful. It's the first step in terms of acknowledging their distress. So it's quite useful to find opportunities to talk with the child, try and find out from them how they're feeling, to see if there's anything which is worrying them. If they don't want to talk, that's fine. But just keep providing those opportunities. If you're on a car journey, it's very good time just to talk with somebody about how things are going, how they're feeling at the moment. Is there any worries? Keep that conversation, trying to open up a discussion. If you have a discussion, listen to what the young person says. Encourage them to talk. Let them know that you want to hear what they have to say, and don't jump in too early. Don't try and find solutions. Don't be judgmental. Don't dismiss what they're telling you. It's really important that you just put your listening ears on and just listen to what your child is saying. Let them know you care, and let them know that you want to try to find ways in which you can help them. Fifthly, it's really important that self-harm does not take over and become the only focus of your relationship with them. You've got a relationship with your child, and self-harm is part of that. It's not the only thing. So whilst it is going to be a worry, you need to keep maintaining and building the rest of your relationship, and don't let self-harm take over and become the only thing you ever talk about or the only thing you're ever thinking about. Helping young people to cope with self-harm might take a little bit of time. As I said at the start of this presentation, self-harm is because the young person doesn't know how to cope with their emotions. It will take time to help them do that. And so you need to stick with them throughout this. And I think that one of the problems, or one of the concerns parents have, is that they want to fix things straight away. But it will take time. But if you can be there and continue to help your child through it, I think that that can be really important, and sends a caring message that we can get through this together. It's really important that you don't dismiss, ignore, or downplay what the child is doing. And I have met many parents who've done this in a way of saying, oh, it'll get better, don't worry about it. It is quite important that we do take this seriously. And particularly if you end up listening and your child saying that they're really, really feeling down and they really want to end their life, then that's the time to really seek some professional support. Take what they are doing seriously, listen, and try and find a way through it. Similarly, you do need to make sure that your child is safe. And if they do something, so if they take an overdose, for example, it is really important that they get taken to the emergency department as soon as possible to be checked out. Doesn't matter how large that overdose is, just to be safe, it is always important to get the child checked so that we are very sure that there's not going to be any complications. Similarly, if they've got open wounds which are becoming infected, it's really important, again, that some medical help is there so that we can prevent these wounds from getting any worse. What you can do with your young person is to try and work out with them a bit of a plan about what can be done to try to keep them safe. So it could be that if they're thinking about taking tablets, that you can remove all medication and lock that somewhere safe. It could be that if they're using sharp objects, they're to cut themselves about whether they can be removed. If a young person is feeling really unsafe, but finds it hard to talk, you might want to have a signal with them that they send you a text with an exclamation mark, so they don't even have to say things, which is a signal that I'm feeling unsafe, and that what you can do is to then go and actively find them and try and get them to come and join you and watch TV or something. So agree with the young person what can be done to try to reduce the risk of subsequent self-harm. You can also try and help them to find alternative ways to express their emotions. So if they are really finding it difficult to deal with emotions, what else can they do? Could they do some physical activity as a way of working those emotions out? Some relaxing activities, bath, showers, mindfulness, some artwork. Quite a lot of self-harm occurs when the young person is on their own. So is there a social activity which they could engage in, reaching out to other young people? And are there ways which they can release their emotions, such as snapping an elastic band on their wrist, clenching an ice cube in their hand until it just melts, punching a pillow? Something else which might be a little bit of a less harmful way of dealing with the emotions they are struggling to cope with. The next thing which a parent can do is to help build your child's self-esteem and to get them to acknowledge and to think about their strengths and their positives. As I said, one of the risk factors for self-harm is low self-esteem. So it's really helpful to encourage young people to acknowledge what they can do, to acknowledge their strengths, to acknowledge their skills, to acknowledge when they have coped. And a very simple positive diary where they can just record events each day is a very simple way of doing that. And finally, it is important to seek professional support, to go and perhaps talk with your GP. If you are feeling very worried about your child, that you can't talk with them, but if you're aware that their self-harm is increasing, or that they're talking that they want to end their life and don't see any point of being here anymore, I think that that is the time to reach out and to discuss this with a professional. You may have somebody already involved with you other than your GP, but if not, a GP would be a very good first step so that you could then discuss this and think about what sort of help might be available for your child. Now, there are other sort of opportunities which you may be interested in exploring. So this website, Harmless, is something which we put together from Oxford Health, a group of clinical staff. We put this together as a way of trying to put some information out there for parents or professionals who might be dealing and coming across young people who are self-harming. And it's a simple website which gets information out there, helps you to think about some of the steps of talking to young people and some of the resources which you might be able to use to help the young person cope and to help you cope with a really distressing, difficult situation. So what I want to move into now is the idea of what we can do, what adolescents can now do to help themselves. And this is now talking with you and sharing a little bit about the research which we're doing at the moment, the Beating Adolescent Self-Harm Program. And this is all about trying to help adolescents to manage and to deal with their self-harm themselves. So this story basically started in my clinical work, where it became very clear that more and more adolescents who I was meeting were self-harming, but they were all self-harming on their own in their bedroom. And when I asked whether there was anybody around at the time, a lot of them said no, but the majority, nearly every one of them, said that they did have their mobile phone with them at the time that they were self-harming. So it led us to wonder whether we could create something which could be accessed by the young person's mobile phone, which could help them at times of distress. And this was the beginning of the BASH study. It fits with what we know about the digital revolution, and there's an annual report which comes out from Ofcom every year about technology, young people's experience of technology and what they're using, etc. at the moment. And in the last Ofcom report, 94% of homes in the UK have access to the internet. And it was only 1% of children who did not have internet access at home via some technological device. So it sort of seems quite reasonable that if we were able to sort of create something which could be digitally provided, that young people would be able to use that and have access to it. Obviously, one of the sort of key sources of help a lot of young people go to are apps. And we know that there are millions of apps out there, and there are around about 20,000 mental health apps which are now available. So when we started this project, one of the questions which we had is, well, there's no point in us creating an app for young people if there's already an app out there which they could use. So we undertook a big literature review, and we searched for any of the apps which had been developed specifically for children and young people who self-harm. And what we found is that there were none at that stage which had been specifically developed for young people who were self-harming. And we did find some mental health apps which are available for young people, but none of these had actually been evaluated in any way. So they were apps, but we have no idea about whether these apps help, or perhaps do they make things worse. So the reason I say that is that if somebody is feeling really down in their mood and feeling overwhelmed by that, if an app had a diary where the young person could record their mood, if they keep recording their mood as down, does it actually have an effect on making the young person feel even more hopeless? Because things never change. So could these apps be harmful in any way? We don't know. So what we did is set upon a process of trying to create an app with young people that could help them manage their distress at times when they were thinking of self-harming. So the whole aim of this app was about prevention. What we wanted to do was to try to provide them with a toolkit of techniques and ideas which they could immediately access and be able to use when they were feeling distressed. There and then, in the moment, they would be able to draw on this toolkit of activities. One of the sort of principles for us, which was really fundamental to this work, was the idea of co-production, co-designing, co-producing the app with the end user, i.e. young people who have a lived experience of self-harm. For us, this was essential. We wanted to design and work with young people so that the app appealed to them, contained their ideas, and therefore was more likely to be used by them. This is quite different to a lot of the apps which are out there on the market, which are created by app developers or perhaps an academic, who is quite sort of divorced from the end user and their experience and what it is that they want in that moment, which is going to be helpful. The third thing we wanted to do in this piece of work was that we wanted to have an app that built the young person's self-efficacy. It helped to develop their own ideas and promote their own ideas. So rather than provide an app which had a set of instructions or just some sort of sections to it, we wanted to allow the young person to be able to enter their own ideas into their toolbox, so that it was a way of trying to really personalize it around the stuff which they had found helpful. And finally, what we wanted to do was to make sure that the ideas and the information that we included in the app was evidence-based, that it reflected the best evidence that we had at the current time about the ways to help young people. So this involved us working quite extensively with clinical staff, looking at the literature which is out there about the evidence base for lots of different therapies, and we included that in our app. This led us to Blue Ice. And Blue Ice is a personalized app which has 3 different sections. There's a section where the young person can monitor their mood. If their mood is down, they will automatically be routed into the second section of the app, which is a mood lifting section. This contains 8 different sections, which can all be personalized by the young person, of ideas and techniques which we know from the evidence base can help young people to cope with and ride out their distress. At the end of the mood lifting section, the young person's asked to re-rate their mood. And if their mood is still down, they are then routed through a series of questions to some emergency contact numbers at the end, which they can then call, text to speak with somebody or to reach out and to find some form of help. Now, the app's called Blue Ice. It's a fairly sort of neutral name, and that's the icon, as you can see there. But it does have some meaning. So blue, feeling down, ICE in case of emergency. But the young people, they liked the name Blue Ice because if anybody else saw it on their phone, it's fairly anonymous. It doesn't have any links about self-harm. And young people would be able to say that it relates to my interest in the sort of ecology, melting ice, things like that. So these are just some screenshots about what the what the app looks like. So there's the mood wheel over on the left-hand side. And the young person rates how their mood is, which then gets logged into their mood diary, which is the second shot. And they can also add a comment here about why they might be feeling as they do. Over on the far right-hand side are the 8 sections of the mood lifter. And these include ideas about physically getting yourself active. Chill and Relax has got some guided, recorded instructions about mindfulness, relaxation, listening to calming waves. Good Times is a photo library. You can upload all your favorite images about the good things which have happened for you, the important people, reasons to live. Listen and Relax is about trying to incorporate your own sort of music library, so that it's uplifting, feel-good music, which you will have all in one place. The idea about do something is the activities which just put a smile on our face. This could be something about baking. It could be watching your favorite episode of a soap drama. Thinking Traps is an opportunity for the young person to sort of download and to type into the app the sort of thoughts which are going through their head, which are really sort of causing them to be distressed and worried. Contact a friend. We encourage young people to put 2 or 3 immediate contact numbers here where they can contact somebody, and they don't have to phone them up and saying, hi, I'm feeling really down at the moment and I'm thinking of harming myself. They can just be somebody who is always fun, always a laugh, always puts a smile on their face, and they can just phone them up and saying, hi, just wondered what you've been up to today. Bit of a loose end at the moment. What's been happening? And the final section is ride it out. And these are some of the ideas from a sort of process called dialectical behavior therapy. Some of the ideas are here in the final slide, which gives the young person a set of strategies to ride out their distress. So, how have young people found the app? Because we undertook an initial study where we found a group of young people attending specialist mental health services here in Oxford Health who were self-harming. We asked if they'd liked the app, and we then sort of gave the app to them. In terms of acceptability, because we co-designed this with young people, we found that the app was really quite acceptable to young people. And when we showed it to young people and gave it to them for 2 weeks and said, well, at the end of that, we'll ask you if you'd like to use it, 93% came back and said that they wanted to use it. In terms of usability, 82% of those who we gave the app to said that they felt able to use it when they were really distressed. So that's great. That's the very time we were hoping they would be able to use it. In terms of safety, we were very keen to test whether there were going to be any sort of functionality issues. Would the app crash, for example? That would be an absolute disaster if the young person had come onto this, was wanting some help, and then the app crashed. We had no functionality issues. And the issue which I raised earlier about sort of monitoring your mood, feeling particularly regularly down, is that going to create further problems? We found no evidence of that whatsoever. And young people didn't raise that to be an issue one moment at all. And finally, was it helpful? Well, what we found is that after we gave this app to young people for 12 weeks, 79% of all young people who we gave it to were harming less or had stopped. Now, it means that some of these young people were still self-harming, but they were doing so less frequently. So we were really, really pleased with that finding. And the other finding was that there were also significant changes in their mental health after using it. So we had significantly fewer sort of symptoms of depression and significantly fewer symptoms of anxiety after using the app. So this was the start. We developed something which seemed to be helpful, seemed to be able to be used at times of distress, seemed to be safe, and seemed to be having some impact. So this has then taken us to the BASH study, Beating Adolescent Self-Harm. Cora at the beginning mentioned the National Institute for Health Research. This research is funded by NIHR, and what we're trying to do now is to do a bigger study to really explore the effects of adding this app on self-harm to young people. So what we're looking at the moment is that we're recruiting into a trial, and we are aiming to recruit 138 young people aged 12 to 17. To be eligible, the young people need to be attending the Oxford Health CAMS services with mental health problems, but they also need to have a history of self-harm. So they need to have self-harmed at least twice in the past 12 months. Most of our participants are harming much more frequently and much more recently. And what we're doing is that we are randomizing these young people to one of two study arms, to either their usual CAMS care, so they continue to meet their CAMS clinician, or the other group will have their usual CAMS care plus access to the Blue Ice app. we're going to be assessing all these young people at the beginning, 12 weeks and 6 months. And we are assessing lots of different things, primarily self-harm, which is our main outcome, depression, anxiety, quality of life, lots of different variables so that we can be as sure as we can about the impact of the app on a range of mental health outcomes. And our research questions are threefold. So basically, what is the effect of adding the app to usual face-to-face care on self-harm and mental health? Does having the app result in the young person needing less healthcare? Because they might have a toolbox to be able to manage some of their distress, it might prevent some self-harm and attendance at accident and emergency departments or crisis appointments with mental health services. And finally, what do young people think about it? Do they still like it? And are they able to use it at times of distress? The study is currently open. So if you have or you are a young person aged 12 to 17 attending Oxford Health CAMS with a history of self-harm and would like to take part, please talk to your Oxford Health clinician and we would then be able to recruit you into the study. So far, we've got 105 young people who have been taken into the study. So we've still got a little way to go. And if you are interested, then we'd be very pleased to hear from you. I have included here some further information for you, some links as my last slide. So if you are a parent or a carer and you want to find out more about what you can do to help your young person, there is an excellent guide, Coping with Self-Harm, a guide for parents and carers, which is available from Oxford University. You can download it as a PDF. I also mentioned the Harmless website. If you are a parent, carer, or a professional, and you want to think about what you can do for a young person, and that's a website there. And if you are a young person and you just can't talk to anybody around you, then you do have options. There's Young Minds, which you are able to contact. There is a parent line, there's a young person's line, and there's always Childline, who are there and able to offer any advice and help you may want. And for anybody who would like to sort of contact me, I put my email address here. And I think that that will be put into the sort of into the presentation at the end. But I thank you for listening, and I'm now going to sort of stop sharing my screen and hand over now for any questions and answers, and back to Cora and Dane.
Thank you, Paul. We have had some questions through, and if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. One of the first questions that we've had through, Paul, is would you say that adolescents tend to grow out of self-harm with hormone changes and experiences? You know, it provides a harsh time for people, but as they mature, are they likely to improve on their own?
I think that's a really good question. And yes, the answer is an overwhelming yes. We know that rates of self-harm rise as young people hit adolescence, but we also know that fortunately they start to drop as they become older adolescents and move to young adults. So there are very, very encouraging signs that there is a natural progression here, that young people might experiment with self-harm to see whether it's helpful. And a lot of those young people might self-harm once but never do it again. The group who we are more concerned about who are those who find that self-harm becomes an important coping mechanism for them, and so they start to use it repeatedly, and quite often the self-harm becomes more severe as they sort of try to sort of get some relief from their distress. But the news is good that over time, a lot of adolescents do find alternative ways of coping, and self-harm becomes less.
Our second question is kind of similar, I guess, but it's more around young people and hormones. And for example, with this, would you be able to track their mood over time and other things such as changes in hormones?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. It's something which I sort of don't feel that I'm sort of particularly sort of well versed on to be able to sort of with authority to comment on that. As I say, we do know that there is this sort of big surge in self-harm in adolescence. It does obviously occur when there's lots going on in the young person in terms of bodily changes, so hormones, physical changes, etc., are going to be likely to be factors. But we also know, going on from the sort of the earlier slides about factors associated with self-harm, that there's lots of factors like relationships, which are really important, the context within which the young person operates, the family, how relationships are there, bullying, relationships with peers, which are so important when you're an adolescent. Similarly, their own mental health and some of their past experiences. So I don't know with authority I'm able to answer that question about hormones, but I just do know that there's a range of factors. And clearly adolescence is a really difficult time for young people.
Okay, we have another question. Are there any early indicators in young children who may self-harm when they reach adolescence?
I think that some of the signs which it might be worthwhile for parents, carers to look out for are these difficulties being able to sort of deal with emotions, manage emotions. And I think that in some of the younger children, what we sort of find with them is that sometimes they might be banging their head against walls, might be banging themselves, hitting themselves. And that's the way that some of the sort of self-harm comes across with the younger age group. So I think that being aware of how the child seems to be responding to emotions, how they seem to be able to manage them, and whether you're getting any of those sort of extreme outbursts. Not that they're going around sort of hitting walls where they're externalizing it, but when they're internalizing it and taking these feelings out on themselves. So one of the key things to watch out for with younger children is that they often don't have access or don't think so much about some of these sort of more severe forms of self-harm, the cutting, the overdosing, burning, etc. But they are able to punch themselves, hit themselves, bang their heads, etc. So things like that are just worth keeping an eye on.
Okay. Our next question is alcohol abuse a significant factor in self-harm?
Well, alcohol's a really interesting one. Because there is a question that for some young people, they are consciously self-harming with alcohol. So they're just going out, getting completely wrecked, ending up in the emergency department, might need some form of medical treatment, because it becomes a way of, again, for a lot of people, dealing with emotions. So a lot of people sort of talk about it as a sort of, for many people there, it's just somebody's drunk too much. But for some people, actually, it is a way of self-harming involving alcohol. And again, alcohol does reduce some of your inhibitions. So again, we know that it might lead you to take more risky behaviors. It might mean that you're less able to look after yourself, and it might mean that you're more likely to be involved in some form of accident or some form of harm.
Okay. Our next question is, do you think the app could be expanded to incorporate help specific for young adults?
Yes, is the short answer. And in fact, we've got a project which is going on at the moment at the University of Bath, where we're doing exactly this, so that we are looking at making the app available to university students at the University of Bath, so that we're increasing the age group that are able to use it. Feedback which we've had from focus groups with university students have been overwhelmingly positive. They like the idea, they like the app, they like the content, they feel that they were able to use it. And so we're currently in the process of testing this with a cohort of students at the university, with a view to making sure that it's safe with that population. And then finally, I think that our ultimate aim, once we know that it is safe, that it is effective, that it has benefits, of making it freely available to anybody who would like to use it. Although it will take us a few years to get to that stage, but that is where we would like to get to.
Our next question is there any support or advice you would suggest for friends of those who self-harm? What to do if they're with the person who begins to self-harm?
I think it's really difficult for young people when they are with somebody who's talking about self-harm, who's thinking about self-harm, and it can become a very big responsibility for them. And I think that one of the things which we're always very clear about, if that is the case, is that if you are the friend, you can try and encourage the young person who is wanting to harm themselves to talk to somebody. That's the key thing, to tell somebody how they're feeling, to go and talk to somebody, and to try to help them to find somebody who they feel comfortable talking with. However, they are not responsible for that person's behavior, for what they do. And it's really important to make that distinction, that they are there to try and help them. And the help they can provide is by acknowledging that you're feeling really down at the moment. It looks like you're really struggling to cope. I can hear that you're wanting to hurt yourself. It sounds like we need to go and find somebody, or to get somebody who you can talk with, so that we can try and put some help in place for you, so that you can learn to deal with this differently.
Okay, I think that's all of our questions. If anybody does have any additional questions, they can contact Paul, or if you'd like to search for studies to take part in, you can go to bepartofresearch.uk. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Cora. And thank you, Professor Stallard. That was a really, really helpful overview of how people kind of come to this difficult situation in their own lives, and how it could be managed in ways in the future. We can understand everyone else's lived experience and support people through difficult times. This is a really important conversation. So thanks so much, everyone, for being involved in this discussion. Thanks for the great questions. So please do come back and watch it again if you want to. And obviously you can pass it on to other friends, family members or colleagues if you feel that you'd like to share this information with them. The festival has a huge range of topics, from these really important pertinent issues, from health and well-being to democracy and religion and violence and conflict, all the way through to happier topics like magical tales into the unknown and adventures into space, and even the baking, science of baking and confectionery. So please browse the festival website and pick events that feel right for you. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks for coming.